Welcome, everyone. We continue our series entitled League of Women Voters Empowering You, a program designed by the League of Women Voters in partnership with Dayton Access Television to provide unbiased, nonpartisan information on issues that are relevant to you, our friends and neighbors throughout the greater Dayton area. My name is David Bodary. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters and your host this evening as we discuss our topic, Empowering You, Voting, and Your Vote Security. Our guests today, again, are Sarah Greathouse, Deputy Director of Montgomery County Board of Elections, and Alicia Lampert, Director of the Greene County Board of Elections. So welcome. I'm so glad to be with you again.
Hello, thanks for having us.
I was thinking it had to be a year ago that we were together, and in fact it was just last March. So there you go. I mean, it's sort of crazy the way the world is right now. But that's one of the things we want to make sure that we talk about is how do we make sure that we can sort of minimize the craziness and manage to understand the security of our vote and then the processes by which we can ensure that our vote is counted, this in every election. So I thought let's get started first talking about the security of the vote and all the things that here in the state of Ohio, the Board of Elections does to ensure the safety and security of our vote. So my first question is, sometimes we hear about voter fraud, and I want to hear what the Board of Elections is doing to ensure that we don't encounter voter fraud.
Absolutely. Voter fraud is something that is incredibly rare. Hundreds, thousands of a percentage. And generally what happens is voters are confused. Sometimes a voter, in our case in particular, we have voters who straddle our county line and they're not sure where they're supposed to vote. We work very hard. Our office communicates with Alicia's office. We just had an issue last week where a new subdivision, nobody was sure who owned that subdivision. So we communicate with one another. We establish whose county an address will exist in when you have new build, and we'll make sure that that person is only able to register in one county.
Sure.
So that's one of the many things that we do. If we do happen to encounter somebody who does attempt to vote twice, we have great processes in place. In Montgomery County, if you've ordered an absentee ballot and you show up to vote on election day, you'll be asked to vote a provisional ballot.
Right.
Provisional ballots are fantastic. They give voters an opportunity so that we can, in this case, if somebody has ordered an absentee, they vote provisionally, we make sure they didn't turn that absentee ballot back in, then we count the provisional ballot.
Sure.
If you've moved after the registration deadline, and by the time this airs, we'll be past the registration deadline, you vote a provisional ballot either in person or at your polling location, we'll make sure that we verify that you didn't vote where you used to live in Greene County, right? And then we'll count that ballot. It's a really great tool for voters for any number of reasons.
You say that, and actually I have a friend who I met just the other day who has a barn. One side of the barn is in Warren County, and the other side of the barn is in Montgomery County.
Yes.
And so now her house is in only one of the two counties. So, but it is the question of, all right, where do I live and how do I make sure that my vote counts appropriately?
We have voters that the county line splits their house, and we determine which county owns that voter by where their bedroom is. Because the question is, where do you sleep?
That's fascinating. So of course there are avenues, there are processes by which we make sure, and any voter who is unsure can do some things to check on that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, voteohio.gov, they can look up and see where they're registered to vote, see if they requested an absentee ballot, where that is in the process. Once they've sent their ballot in, they can check to see as it goes along the process when it's been received and counted.
I want to re-emphasize that because what you're saying is they can actually track their ballot from the absentee request to being received to then being sent back to the Board of Elections and then being received by the Board of Elections, right? So they will know where that ballot is?
So at this point in the process, you can look and make sure that your absentee ballot request was received. As of tomorrow, it will say that it's been sent. And then once you either drop it off in our drop box, drop it off at our office, put it in the mail, we get it back in. We will do some work on our end to verify that everything is complete on the ID envelope, and then we will do, we call it receiving, and it'll be noted as received. Once it's received, that means it will be counted.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there are a lot of tools like that available for voters online where you can be an active participant in democracy, and we really encourage folks, especially right now, after redistricting, look yourself up, voteohio.gov. It's such an incredibly powerful tool. You can do it on your smartphone. And that will also tell you, we've had changes in districts.
Okay.
We've had changes in polling locations. Before Election Day, look yourself up. See if your polling location changed. We had many voters who were driving past a polling location to get to their polling location, and we've tried to bring that back into alignment. And I know our friends in Greene County have done a lot of the same work.
Yeah, we have.
So, and it is possible then that the local, whether it's grade school, high school, in some cases church, wherever my voting location was, that may have changed. And so I need to make sure that I know where to arrive on Election Day, and that would be November 8th, Tuesday, November 8th.
And also, if we've changed your polling location for whatever reason, like in August, we used the Greene County Fairgrounds. Well, the fair was going on. So we send out postcards saying your new polling location is, or your temporary.
Yeah.
So we are always communicating with that as well. So
look in the mail for those postcards, but also check voteohio.gov.
.gov.
Yes.
So VOTE Ohio.gov, right? So that way you can be sure to know that you are registered and that where your polling location would be. Absolutely.
you can also make address changes there. You can do name changes there. I mean, there's a plethora of things that are available on the website for voters.
Well, we mentioned that we were going to mention voteohio.gov over and over, so I think that's the third time. We can do it 3 more times and we'll get it covered.
And then it'll start to stick.
Yeah, I hope so.
We get a kickback every time we say it.
I don't believe that. So, what else do citizens need to understand regarding the security of our vote? I know that we talked before about how essential security of the vote is. What else is going on to ensure that our vote is secure?
Well, your boards of elections are bipartisan organizations. So now that we are in an active election, there are parts of our office that I cannot access without a Republican counterpart, and there are parts of Alicia's office that she cannot access without a Democratic counterpart. We actually have physical keys on door. We have 2 locks on doors, and you have to have a Democratic key or Republican key even to get into some parts of our office right now. The voting system itself, a voting system is a series of subsystems. Those subsystems don't talk to each other. Much of it is not connected to the internet ever. And so we have to do work, and that's why Alicia and I still have jobs, to make those systems work together. It looks seamless to the voter on Election Day, but there's a lot of work that goes into the back end because the tabulation system is never, ever, 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 ever connected to the internet, for instance.
And I think that's often misunderstood, that they think that somehow these bits of data are being passed along through the internet, and of course that is not the case.
That is not the case. And we're a Dominion County, so we get a lot of it. But there is no internet capability within that. And we've taken it a step further, and every single port in our machine is security sealed and locked. So if there was any type of access that we didn't approve of, we would know.
Right.
So
help me then to dispel the sort of myth or misunderstanding. How does my ballot that I complete then get basically counted?
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So I go in.
There's a lot of conversation about the touchscreens. So in our county, and I think in yours, you can use a touchscreen to
Right.
mark your ballot. What those touchscreens do is they're super expensive pens, is what they are.
Yeah.
And they will print out the ballot. You physically, as the voter, take your paper ballot, you put it in a scanner. That scanner is what does the actual tabulating.
Okay.
The touchscreen has nothing to do with it. We know that this is accurate because in Ohio, after every election, we audit. What an audit means is we take an electronic result, we compare it to a certain number of the actual paper ballots, we retain those paper ballots after the election, and we say, this is the machine result, and this is the paper, and it's accurate, and it matches, and we know that for every election. And it's an incredibly powerful way that voters, I hope, understand that we are making sure that things are accurate. In our case, I know we put our audits online. You can go to our Facebook page and watch hours and hours of people sitting in a room counting ballots.
Okay.
yeah, and ours is actually different from Montgomery County. They don't have a paper ballot at the end. It prints in the machine.
Right.
So
and
when
you
we
see it though.
Yeah, and then so when we do our audit, we have to go through the rolls of paper
Okay.
to compare it to the data off of the USB drive.
But what you're telling me is that that roll of paper then is maintained or
Absolutely.
retained, and that becomes the permanent document that is verifiable, I guess you could say. And obviously then you've also, what's the right word, scanned the ballot, or in your case, it's been downloaded to a USB.
Right.
But that USB, what happens to that?
Those USBs are incredibly well encrypted. They're proprietary. You could, if you were able to access a port, and as with Alicia, our ports are all secured, you could put a USB, nothing's gonna happen. You could try to take that USB and put it somewhere else without the deeply encrypted key. You would not be able to do anything with that. We also make sure on election day, we are required by law, those USB ports come back to the Board of Elections in the company of one Democratic and one Republican polling official.
Right.
They have to ride in the same car together. So we maintain a chain of custody throughout, and we also maintain dual control throughout.
And by dual control, you're meaning a Democrat and a Republican are together in the presence of those USBs that are probably in a bag or
They're in a bag and locked.
Bank,
Yes.
A bank, what do you call those
Similar.
zippered bank
Yes.
things? Okay, so, and they come together and then they come to the Board of Elections.
Yes.
And they enter into,
So once again, at the Board of Elections, once they're brought into our offices, they are brought into the tabulation room. Again, the tabulation equipment is never connected to the internet. It's a closed system. We maintain all kinds of controls over that. There are cameras, there's locks, there's so much stuff.
Keypads.
Keypads.
It's like Mission Impossible.
right, okay.
Right, right. And then those are uploaded into the tabulation system. And so on election night, the first returns that you see, so around 8:15, 8:30, when you start seeing returns on the news, that's actually all of the absentee and in-person early voting
Okay.
that's already happened. So that's the very first stuff you'll see, 8:15, 8:30 on election night.
Yes.
And then starting around 8:45, 9 o'clock, you'll start seeing stuff come back in from the locations.
From the actual polling locations
Right.
as
Yes.
those begin to arrive. Obviously, the closest ones probably arriving sooner than those that are more distant.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And of course, that then becomes part of the tabulation,
Yes.
right? And you've got a Democrat and Republican there overseeing all of that at all times.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
at all times.
And so these machines are not connected to the internet, so there's no way that somebody's going to hack in and sort of change the outcome of the election.
No, absolutely. The election systems are so incredibly complex. It's not just the security of that one part of the system, because again, it's a subsystem. There are other systems. And so the way that things are done in Greene County, the way that things are done in Montgomery County, we run different equipment. So you can't, there's no one size fits all bad guy move. You got to do something different in every county.
Right.
And even if we were running the same equipment, we'd have different procedures.
Okay.
We also have very different policy outlook. So for 88 counties to come together and try to make the election go one way with Republicans and Democrats, impossible.
Okay.
In addition to the fact that we're all take oaths and we
Yes,
take those oaths
and
very
yeah, we
seriously.
don't wanna go to
seriously.
prison, yes.
Absolutely. And yet I think we also recognize that there's a lot of scrutiny and that you're under quite a bit of pressure as it relates to our election outcomes. So we appreciate the work that you do, that's for sure. Any other myths that you might help dispel as it relates to the common person's understanding of how our election systems work?
So one thing for us being in Dominion County is we keep hearing about this machine in Georgia. The machine that was used in Georgia with that technology that's in it is not something that's even approved to be used in Ohio.
Okay.
So there are different systems that are approved. Everything goes through a process with the Secretary of State, and it can take years for a system to get approved. And that's not just our voting machines, that's our poll pads, that's our printing vendors. Everybody is required to go through testing with the Secretary of State.
Sure.
Everybody who works at a Board of Elections has to pass a background check. All of our vendors, their employees all have to pass background checks. Our temporary seasonal employees all have to pass background checks. There are a number of things. As Alicia said, not only do we have different systems in the 88 counties, but there are 50 different states. In those states, things are different. In the state of California, in some counties, the head elections official is an elected recorder, and in some counties in the same state, they're appointed officials like we are.
Okay.
It's fascinatingly complex.
Right.
Right.
And
Well,
I
I
moved from
appreciate that.
Washington where it was all mail-in. So I voted for the first time in person when I moved here.
Wait, in the state of Washington, everything is mail-in.
Everything.
Okay. And while we think about other states, let's recognize that in the state of Ohio, we've got a pretty good system going too, right?
Yes.
So that we have a variety of different options for voting. And why don't we move to that now? So we're in the election season here in Ohio. Help me understand the various options that voters have. Today being, I'm checking my watch, October 11th, right? So a person, at least in this moment, needs to be registered to vote. Obviously, when this is aired, it will be too late to be registered to vote for this November 8th election. But here in Ohio, what are our options?
Sure. Well, you can vote early in person, you can vote by mail, or you can vote on election day.
So I heard you say three things. Early in person, and that means I would go to the Board of Elections,
Yes.
and I would vote in person early at given times.
Yes.
And are
Those
those-
times can be found again at voteohio.gov.
Okay.
Because they're different. For the first 3 weeks, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, which is a solid rule, but we do have some weekend hours in the last 2 weekends before the actual election day.
And in fact, I saw in the Dayton Daily News yesterday, they had listed for Montgomery County all of those dates, times, and locations. So I
Yes.
appreciate that. I don't know that it was for Greene County, but it
We're
is
exactly
available.
the same
Ah, beautiful.
at our BOE. Yes.
Okay. So there's one, we can do it in person early. The two was absentee, where I would mail in.
Yes.
And my wife has requested an absentee ballot because she wasn't sure if she was going to be traveling or not. So she'll be able to mail that in. What are the rules or the processes that she should pay attention to when she goes to complete her absentee ballot?
For one, make sure you sign the envelope and check all the boxes that need to be checked. Put it in the security envelope. Make sure it goes back in that sealed envelope before you put it back in the envelope you're mailing it in. I know there's a lot going on there, but we have a lot of process that we have to go through with that.
So, but if I break that down, we're talking about two envelopes as well as the ballot.
Yes.
So the ballot goes into envelope number one, which is the
Security envelope.
security envelope,
Then
and she has to
another envelope.
sign that security envelope.
Yeah, there's some filling out to do on that,
Okay.
and make sure you get that done. That creates more work for us and is a bother to people if it's not filled out correctly.
Absolutely. We want to make sure our vote counts. And then once that's completed, following the directions that are pretty clearly provided, you put it in the second envelope, which is the one that's addressed to the Board,
Board
of
of
Elections.
Elections, and that can go in the drop box. That can be dropped off in person, or it can go in the mail.
Okay. Perfect.
Just a couple of things on that too. When you're filling out that absentee ballot, make sure that you're filling in the circle or the square completely.
completely.
Use black ink. We can remake ballots, but it's faster for us and it's better for you if you are very clear about what your intent is on your ballot. You asked about myths earlier. One of the big myths and one of people's concerns is signatures. 9 times out of 10, maybe even more than 9 times out of 10, if there's a signature issue with either an absentee ballot request or that ID envelope that Alicia was talking about, the signature issue is going to be that they forgot to sign it. So we really ask
Yeah.
people to do that. We are here as much as possible. We work hard to help people vote. We want you to vote. And so signature issues almost always are just a complete lack of a signature. Same thing with date of birth. Make sure that you're completing all of those required fields. We will contact you after the election, but as Alicia said, it'll be much less hassle for you if you get it right the first time.
Absolutely. And so you're kind of taking me back to that high school where I had to fill in the bubbles, right?
Absolutely.
And so you're saying I can't just check the bubble, I can't just X the bubble, I need to fill it in with the black pen or my number 2 pencil.
Right.
Actually, black pen. If you do
Black
a number
pen.
2 pencil, we're going to remake it.
Right.
A bipartisan team will do that.
Okay.
But the black pen is the best way to go.
And that's because?
That is because it's the scanners read it
Got it.
better.
And
Okay.
also that also saves us time during the adjudication period. So anytime there's like an ambiguous mark or something, we actually have to sit down together and review that ballot to make sure we're both agreeing that that is the person they were voting for.
You're
and it
taking
can
me
take
back
hours
to
and
Florida
hours.
and what was it, Bush Gore, right? That was like when they were
Well,
looking at him and all that. So
And that is a great example of why we have so many security, why our procedures are so much more uniform across the state. One of the things that the world discovered in 2000 is that every county was doing everything in their own way. We now have some very good standards that are statewide. It's part of why we have such great secure elections in Ohio. We remake those ballots in bipartisan teams. Those remakes are approved by our boards, which are also bipartisan.
good.
So we learned some incredibly important lessons back in the day.
Yeah. All right, so we've talked about two forms. We talked about early voting in person, where you go to the Board of Elections. We talked about absentee voting, where I would request the absentee ballot, I'd fill it in, use my 2 envelopes, make sure I sign it, all
Yes.
that. The third would be the traditional, or what I'm, I guess, traditionally accustomed to, and that is going in person to my polling location and casting my ballot. Anything that we should be paying attention to there? Is there information that you want us to remember, to think about, or bring?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we actually have a couple state issues on the ballot this year. Those are going to be posted at each polling location. In Xenia City, we have some charter amendments, and so people can actually read through exactly what's being changed. That's going to be at the polling locations as well.
Okay,
There's always information there to read.
for sure.
So yeah.
Yep.
And
Additionally,
since you brought it
on
up, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that people realize that in order to take a look at and understand those statewide issues or the local issues, they can use the League of Women Voter Guide to try to understand and make sure that they're familiar with what they'll be encountering. And so the voter guide is there to help you to kind of sort of sort through the various decisions you need to make as you go to vote. And we've done our best to request from all of the candidates, as well as the state issues, to represent what they have offered us. In the event that they haven't offered us information, it will simply say that information was not received from that candidate. So use that voter guide to help yourself as you try to make sure you understand your choices, be it a statewide issue or a local issue.
And if I may just add a couple of other things. I know that we have a lot of issues on the ballot in addition to those 2 statewide
Yes,
issues.
we do.
Make sure when you're looking at your ballot, especially if you're voting absentee or using a hand-marked ballot, do the front and the back. In some cases, I know you have a lot of 2-page ballots. So
Every single one.
So when you are voting absentee in particular,
Yes.
make sure that you complete both pages of the ballot if you were sent 2 pages. Make sure you're returning both pages.
Yes.
It helps us. After the election, I mentioned audits before, we also do something called ballot accounting, which is an
Okay.
entirely different show. We'll talk about another day. But needless to say, it's another safeguard. So election day, we're open 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. And again, check your polling location at voteohio.gov.
That's 5th time, so voteohio.gov. That's the 6th time. I think we've got it by now. People will be able to spell it for us. So in-person voting certainly is the last opportunity, but it is so important, I think, that people remember that you want to make a plan to vote. So don't just say, oh, I'll do it, but make a plan. I'm going to get there because, or I've got a ride, or I need a ride, who can I talk to? You need to make a plan to vote. So don't leave it up to chance, don't leave it up to, well, we'll see how the day feels, but make a plan to participate. Our election is so important. It isn't something that we should just do haphazardly, so make a plan. And I would really argue, begin with some sort of a guide, whether it's the voter guide that the League of Women Voter here in Greater Dayton provide, or if you have another tool that you use and find helpful, but use that as well. All right, so are there common questions that you find yourself addressing with people over and over again as it relates to their ballot or their election or anything like that?
Well, so far we've got a lot of people asking, where's my ballot?
Right.
Oh.
Because they've sent in their absentee form and they think that it should come right away. Well, state law dictates that they cannot go out until the first day of early vote, which is tomorrow.
Right.
So
So at the earliest, it hits the mail tomorrow, which is why it hasn't hit my home yet.
yes.
Yes.
I can
It is-
live with that.
It's not instantaneous.
It is not.
Yes.
It is entirely possible. We have been working very, very closely with the Postal Service. People are always asking, is absentee voting safe? What about issues with the Postal Service? We understand that. Every piece of official election mail has a special seal on it. We work closely with the post office. Some people may actually even receive their absentee ballots on Wednesday the 12th. They will get back to us. They're always prioritized by the Postal Service.
Okay.
If you're still not comfortable with that, every Board of Elections in the state of Ohio has at least one drop box. That drop box is outside. It's accessible 24/7. It's under camera 24/7. And also it too is only accessible by double lock and key. So we have those drop boxes emptied by, again, a bipartisan team.
Right.
So no matter what, you can drop it off at our office in person. You can put it in that drop box. You can return it by mail when you're doing an absentee ballot. And this is confusing for voters, and I don't blame them. Do you remember that movie, The American President?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of that is saying that democracy is hard. Not only do you have to educate yourself using tools like the voter's guide, but you also have to educate yourself about the process. So absentee ballots must be postmarked by the day before the election, but can be received in person at the Board of Elections until 7:30 on Election Day.
So that means November 7th if I'm going to mail it back.
Correct.
And I have 10 days for it to be received back.
Correct.
Or I can take that absentee ballot and drop it off at the Board of Elections building
On Election Day.
on Election Day,
Up
which for
until
me is convenient because it's right across from where I work.
Exactly,
at the county
exactly.
building. Yeah.
And also, additionally, please don't take your absentee ballot to your polling location. If you do that, they can't accept it,
Right.
but they will offer you the opportunity to vote provisionally.
Okay, right. So just to anticipate those things.
Yes.
I can see though where, right, people that maybe are worried about it, they begin to think, oh wait, did I do that right? So where can they go to make sure that they're going to do it right?
VoteOhio.gov.
I appreciate that. So voteohio.gov. All right. What have I forgotten to ask?
I mean,
I do know we started this conversation talking about security, and I know that one of the best ways for voters to learn more about elections is we have a number of public tests throughout the process. So not only do we put our audit online for people to watch, you can also watch at 3 different times during every election a thing called the public test, where we have a marked set of ballots with a known outcome. We run it through the system to make sure that the system is tabulating everything correctly. We already did one prior to our pre-election testing. We'll do it again in a couple of days, and we'll do it again at the end of the season. If you really want to know about election security, become a poll worker.
absolutely.
If you can't do it this year, we're always looking for new recruits. We're always doing training. It is the best way to learn about election security.
Is there still time for a person to become a poll worker?
Yes.
There is.
There
okay.
is.
But we would anticipate that there'll be a background check as well.
For poll workers, we don't do it, but you must be a registered voter
Got
in the place where so you'll have to be a registered voter in Greene County or Montgomery County or Clark County, wherever it is.
Okay.
And we take it a step further in Greene County. We only use unaffiliated voters as a last resort.
Okay.
Yes.
So trying to make sure that you've got some, what's the right word, equity,
Yes.
so that you've got a Democrat and a Republican.
It's always
that
a Democrat and
always,
Republican.
Always
Yes.
together. Okay.
Absolutely.
We just finally got the board to agree to allow us to use unaffiliated voters for those times when we can't get poll workers
Right.
in. So.
And of course, during the pandemic, I think we had some challenges with poll workers.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing that kind of carrying over, or are you feeling better about the number of poll workers you have?
This election season's been pretty great. I would say in August it was a little rough. May was a little rough, but we
Okay.
pulled through.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely improved since the pandemic. I think part of it is people who never had thought about doing it before have done it,
Right.
and now they've learned so much. They've enjoyed the experience. They love seeing their friends and neighbors on Election Day and learning about it. They're sort of ambassadors for election security, which is wonderful. But we're still living in very interesting times, and so people have a lot of feelings. One of the great things about working on Election Day is that's a day where everybody's focused on the same thing, and that's serving our voters.
Okay. So we live in a democracy that's a bit messy at times, certainly challenging. At times, I think it's polarizing. Our democracy requires us to obviously be engaged, to be active, not to be passive individuals. We can't watch it the way we might watch a baseball or a football game, even though this is a great time to watch those things, but we have to be active in our democracy. So it starts by becoming a registered voter, and hopefully all of the viewers are. And then it continues as we educate ourselves using the voter guide or other resources that we can access to be able to make sure that we know how we intend to vote. And then obviously when we go ahead and we vote on election day or through the various means that we've talked about. But there's work that needs to be done as we continue to actively create a more perfect union. I appreciate your efforts to make that happen for us. I want to thank our guests today, Sarah Greathouse, Deputy Director, Montgomery County Board of Elections, and Alicia Lampert, Director of the Greene County Board of Elections. I've really enjoyed our conversation. The League of Women Voters encourages everyone to participate in this 2022 election and in every election. If you have further questions about either this upcoming election or perhaps about programs that you'd like to see us do, please contact the League either at the phone number 937-228-4041 or our email at league@lwvdayton.org. I'll say that again, league@lwvdayton.org. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Thank you for sharing your time with us tonight, and I hope that you take your opportunity to prepare yourself to participate actively in our democracy. Good night.